Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Teresa, can you hear me? Teresa?
Yeah, yes, I can now.
Okay, I had to set up my speaker.
Oh, okay.
Now, I'm also on my computer.
Yes. Can you see my control panel on your screen, or is it just the PowerPoint?
Right now, it's just the PowerPoint.
Good. That's what I was hoping. I didn't get to practice with you guys again before we did this, and I couldn't remember if I needed to do something. So I'm in charge right now, and we have, is Sammy Ripley on, please? Sammy, are you on? Can you hear me? No. Essie, can you hear me still?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Oh, good. Okay,
Your voice comes across well.
good. Is Sammy on there, please? Sammy, do you hear me?
Did you see how I did it, that you're Esther Lee Peterson and I'm Essie Peterson?
Yeah. It's great. I think I just need to test one thing with you, if that's okay, while we're
Sure.
waiting for folks to get on. There's a couple resources that Perry wants to go away to for a second, and I want to know if it bounces back okay. Oh, it does. Okay. I don't know why it shows
It
two.
came back, right?
Okay. I'm going to test my screen movement.
Nice.
Okay, good. Okay. Now you see my screen, right?
Yes,
And now you're back.
correct.
Okay.
Now, when's Perry and Cherie and Jennifer?
They,
They're listening to us. They want to go into their audio and set it up.
some reason I lost my toolbar.
Yeah, I was seeing your toolbar as well before. I'm sorry, I said no, but I was seeing it.
Okay. You're not seeing it now, right?
I am not.
Okay. I had trouble dialing in, so I hope that's not going to be a problem for folks.
I didn't dial anywhere.
Now, Perry, Jude, and Jennifer show being on. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, but it seemed like you couldn't hear me.
Okay.
Hello?
Try now. Jennifer and then Perry?
Yeah, can you hear me? This is Jennifer.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
But we need to have you speak a little louder, Jennifer.
Okay, I'm going to turn up the volume on my phone. If that doesn't work, I'll just pick up the receiver and talk into that.
Yeah, it's nice. It's very nice.
Okay.
For some reason I'm having trouble getting Perry. I can see her, but
Her thing shows up as on mute, I think, which is what was happening to me.
I had to go into my computer and change that to unmute it.
very strange. I can't get hers to unmute.
Oh,
There it goes. Yay, it finally went. Okay.
Are you guys there? This is Perry Jude.
Yes, we are, Perry.
Okay, great.
Hi,
Sorry
Perry.
about
It's
that.
Essie.
Hey, S.A., congratulations!
Thank you very much. I have some nice pictures to share.
I can't wait. I heard you were beautiful.
We want pictures.
It was very. Yeah, I'll share them. How many people? Yes. Hello. Uh-huh. Okay. What's your screen? What's your screen look like?
I do apologize for everyone that we're having. This is our first try as a webinar, so I apologize for any delays that we're having. We're hoping that folks are still trying to get in. They're starting to come in a little bit faster now. And the thing that I discovered is that I have to unmute all of you to be able to have you speak to me. So right now I show Jeanette Cruz, Ralph Scott, and Sammy Ripley. Is everyone on, and can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Hang in there with us where some people are trying to get in and not used to this new technology. So thank you for your patience. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone until it's a little bit, a few more folks are on.
Go to webinar. but do it.
I have everyone muted at this time. Hopefully you can hear me okay. We're still waiting for a few more folks to come on. Thank you for your patience. Hello, everyone. We're still waiting for a few folks to get on, and that includes one of our presenters. As soon as she can get on, or we'll give her a few more minutes to see if she can get on, and then we'll get started. Thank you for your patience. Hello, everyone. I apologize for the delay on Fighting for Democracy teleconference and webinar. We are trying to give assistance to one of our presenters who's having a little difficulty getting in. If you'll please be patient, we'll be with you in just a moment. Thank you. Perry, Jude, and Jennifer, would you please prepare to go ahead in just a minute?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, I do apologize. One of our presenters is having difficulty getting in. We're hoping that she will be able to join us at one time very soon. We are going to go ahead and begin our presentation with Perry Jude Radisic, and we're going to fast forward through this part here and introduce you to Perry Jude. Perry Jude is the Executive Director of the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and it's a nonprofit public interest law firm, and the center is designed for protection and advocacy, providing services to Arizona on a wide range of physical and mental disabilities. Prior to the center, she served as the Disability Rights Manager for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Rural Development in Washington State and Oregon. She also served as an equal rights officer for the city of Tucson, and she has extensive work in the federal civil rights lobbying and nonprofit management experience. She's a graduate from the University of Arizona College for Law, and she has a bachelor's in arts from the University of Pittsburgh. Perry Jude, welcome, and thank you for being on the call today.
Thank you, Therese, and thank you, SABE and the National Technical Assistance Project for sponsoring this webinar, and for Jennifer and hopefully Sherry will be joining us soon, and for all of you who have agreed to be on this webinar today to talk about democracy and some of the threats to voting that are out there right now. What I wanted to do is just talk briefly with you about the things that I've seen. I live in Arizona and work in Arizona, and I have worked in the voting rights program at the Arizona Center for Disability Law for the last 7 years, and I've noticed some trends that I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to talk about 5 threats or trends that must be addressed in order for persons with disabilities, in order for us to have accessible and inclusive elections. And the first threat or trend that I see and continue to see is polling site accessibility problems. And I think all of us who work for protection and advocacy agencies still find, even today, access problems with polling sites. I listed some of my own reasons why I have found accessibility problems still in Arizona. And when we get to a point where we can have a dialogue and some questions and answers, one of the questions I want to know from you is, why do you still find polling site access problems in your communities? In Arizona, the reasons why I find problems is because polling sites change every election year. They're not the same sites. In some cases, some communities keep the same polling sites year after year, and in some places, polling sites change each election year. So what happens when these polling sites change year to year, what I find is that election directors don't utilize the entire Department of Justice survey that we as protection and advocacy agencies utilize for polling sites. So when I or our staff go out to survey a polling site, we're taking the entire survey with us, and we're looking at everything. And if the election staff didn't use the entire survey and they didn't check for everything, well, we anticipate we're going to find some problems, and we do. The other thing I've noticed is that election staff will ignore accessibility problems, either because they think if a parking lot was supposed to be 2% in all directions and it's 3% or 5% and they don't think that is significant, they'll ignore it. Or maybe they didn't take the proper tools out with them to do the survey, and they're just going to do an eyeball inspection without measuring, and that's not good enough. We know that's not good enough. So, and it's just not us finding the problems. I think for those of us who do this work on an ongoing basis, we know that the September 2009 Government Accounting Office study found that over 70% of our polling places around the country are still not accessible. 70%. And of those, 45% offered curbside voting, but even 27% of those did not offer curbside voting. And so we're talking about 70% of our polling places around America remain not accessible to people with disabilities. So I continue to find polling site accessibility to be a trend, to be a threat to democracy to be a problem that we have to continue to fight if we are going to have accessible and inclusive elections in our country. Therese, if we could go to the next slide. And again, I hope when we get to the place where we are going to have conversation, we can have some dialogue about why you think you are finding accessibility problems in your state, because you may have similar or different reasons than I've cited as to why I continue to find them in Arizona. Here's something in Arizona that we are going to encounter in 2012. Mega voting centers. And again, don't know if you will be experiencing this trend in your state. Mega voting centers. I think when this bill passed, so in Arizona, our counties now have the option of getting rid of your local polling place. I think the good news here is that it would extend the period of time that people have to vote. That's how our state Secretary of State sold this. So you would have a longer period of time to vote. You wouldn't just have election day to vote. There would be these, so it would be like a permanent early voting, not just election day, but you would be able to vote for a longer period of time, maybe a week or two. No more precinct voting. You would have these mega election centers, mega voting centers. And the hope is that there would be less voting centers so that there would be less accessibility problems. And the hope, and see, I've underlined hope because we don't know yet because we haven't done this yet. The hope is that these voting centers would be located in high traffic areas or areas where a lot of people go on a regular basis, shopping malls or community centers where a lot of people visit on a regular basis. The concern here that we have is that it would reduce the community's ability to get in and out quickly on election day, because if you have a mega voting center, that means a lot of people may wait till election day to go vote, and there may be longer lines on election day. It also may mean that people have to travel a longer distance to vote, because you won't just go a few blocks to your local precinct to vote. Now you have to go a long ways to vote because each county may only have a few voting centers open on election day. And there's going to be a lot of confusion over where to vote, because if people aren't paying attention that there are these new rules about voting, if we don't do a good job of educating our community about these changes, then people are going to show up to their old church, to the old library, to the old community center, and there won't be anybody there to vote, to help them vote. And they're going to wonder what they were supposed to do, and we're concerned that people may walk away and not follow through to go and vote. So there will be confusion on election day over where to vote. Where is my new voting center? And we hope that that doesn't cause a barrier to voting. So we are concerned that 2012 may have more barriers for people to vote in Arizona. The next and third of my 5 threats is the increase in identification. The way people have sold this is that this would be an end to voter fraud. And on the bad side, I have to say, well, what voter fraud is there? And there's a lot of studies that have been done. There's a group called, and if you want this document, I can give this to you. Therese and I can send this to you at the end of the presentation. A group called the Advancement Project. It was founded in 1999 by civil rights lawyers whose mission it is to dismantle structural barriers and to fight for inclusion and racial equality. And in April of this year, they published a study called What's Wrong with This Picture? And they looked at new photo ID proposals. And there's a national trend now in state legislatures, and Arizona was just one of 30 state legislatures this year. 30 state legislatures, that's about 2/3 of our legislatures, that introduced proposals on stricter photo ID requirements to vote. There's significant momentum to pass these bills through our state legislatures. And these bills have many common elements. And it's not just about showing some kind of ID, but it's about limiting the type of ID that's acceptable or requiring multiple pieces of identification, all in the name of doing away with voter fraud. And when the Advancement Project took a look at voter fraud, they couldn't find voter fraud. And studies have shown that this problem is essentially non-existent, and at best maybe it's sporadic and anecdotal, but it's not widespread, and it's certainly not commonplace. There's another study that we can send to you from the Brennan Center for Justice. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's called The Truth About Voter Fraud. And again, voter fraud, what does that mean? Voter fraud means when individuals cast ballots that they know that they're not eligible to cast. So it would mean maybe you want to cast 2 ballots, or you cast a ballot in a wrong precinct, or you cast a ballot that you're not eligible to cast. And what the Brennan Center found when they did research about voter fraud is, again, we're talking about maybe isolated incidents, and most of what people consider voter fraud were really clerical or typographical errors, maybe an error in a birth date, or maybe there were dual registrations. People registered themselves in one county and another county, and maybe went back to the wrong county to vote. Or maybe the death records, people voted, that, you know, this vote from the grave thing really ends up being that somebody voted, they were alive when they voted, and then they unfortunately died a week after they voted. Or people thought that Perry Jude Radicic may have had a felony record, but maybe they didn't know that my rights were restored. My civil rights to vote were restored, and so they falsely claimed that I didn't have a right to vote. And so these are how these stories of voter fraud get out into the public. And so that's where we see this push to end voter fraud when there really isn't voter fraud to end. It's a solution in search of a problem. There is no problem to have a solution for. The other issue related to voter identification is that only citizens can vote. Well, only citizens can vote now anyway, and there are penalties already in place in every state. There are federal penalties in place that if you are not eligible to vote, if you are not a citizen and you cast a ballot, that you can be penalized. So again, the concern here by both the Brennan Center for Justice, the concern by the Advancement Project, the concern by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the concern by the Protection and Advocacy agencies and others, is that this trend, the trend to increase identification to register to vote, the trend to increase identification when you go to vote, is really about creating barriers. It's creating a barrier. So when we as a P&A try to register people to vote, and now you have to have multiple pieces of identification on you to register to vote, we cannot easily register people to vote at a shopping mall or a grocery store or a booth at an outreach event because people don't carry multiple pieces of identification on them. You cannot easily register people to vote in Arizona now. And when you go and vote, you have to remember to carry every piece of identification because they're making it harder. You have to show multiple pieces of identification to vote in some states, all creating a barrier to vote. This is the trend. 30 states introduced legislative proposals to strengthen or to create stricter laws around photo ID. either to register or to vote. This trend will not go away. It will come back again in 2012. The Advancement Project felt that the reason that this was happening is because in 2008, what they saw was a record turnout of voters who were people of color. And they believe that these efforts are linked to voter suppression efforts. The Advancement Project also found that 11% of voters in our country, or 21 million people, do not have government photo ID. And most of these 21 million people who do not have government photo ID, 21 million people, this group is made up of seniors, people of color, people with disabilities, and the poor. So, we are concerned that the increase in voter identification, photo ID, is about trying to exclude 11% from voting, and it's really not about only citizens voting and ending voter fraud, because these are isolated incidents at best and not a reason to enact all of these stricter rules and laws. And I would be interested in your experience in your state when we get to the point to have a conversation. Therese, the next slide, please. The fourth concern, threat that I've identified to democracy continues to be the lack of accessible language. And here I've identified the voter information guides and government websites that are available to the public that are not in accessible formats for all reading levels. For many people, we get a voter guide that is really thick before Election Day that is just completely unmanageable in terms of trying to maneuver through the information and the ballot language. That information is not in an accessible reading format, and it needs to be. Government websites that are supposed to be for information purposes to get ready for an election and to give the public information about candidates and about ballot issues are not in accessible reading formats. Voter education guides put out by different community groups are also not in accessible formats for all reading levels. And I think we all know that when we go to vote, the ballot language is very confusing and is not in accessible formats. And I think we all know that that is done on purpose to confuse voters, so that voters do not really know how to vote on Election Day. Do we vote yes, or do we vote no on Election Day for a proposition? Therese, thank you. And then finally, the last of the 5 major threats or trends that I think are out there for democracy is the state and federal funding cuts. And yes, I know everyone is looking to save money. I think this saving money provides cover to move to these mega polling centers to reduce the number of polling sites. I think it's easy to cast a vote to reduce the number of polling centers around the country, certainly around Arizona, because everyone's looking to save some money. I think the cuts in state and federal funding to elections delays the research and the purchase of technological advances that could increase the accessibility of voting systems, because we know our voting systems still are not universally accessible. And so cuts to PAVA, cuts to the Help America Vote Act and to other election laws can and will delay funding for research to increase the accessibility of our voting system. Cuts at the local level will reduce training opportunities for poll workers. And we know that if poll workers do not continue to receive ongoing training, that they will continue to come in poorly trained. They won't be able to set up the technology. They will continue to come in with poor attitudes, which continue to create barriers to voting. Then eventually, if the Help America Vote Act funding goes away, which has been proposed by the President, it will eventually end fundings for the Protection and Advocacy System and for SABE, which would end programs like this and voting access and advocacy work that we all do. And then it would be up to the Protection and Advocacy Board of Directors to decide how and when to continue voting advocacy work within our protection and advocacy agencies. I know that was a lot of material related to fighting for democracy. Again, I look forward to a discussion after Jennifer speaks, if Sherry has not joined us by that time, about these issues. And again, if you don't have the materials, Brennan Center for Justice, the Advancement Project, and the GAO study from 2009, we would be happy to share with you either via email or at the end of our broadcast. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you very much, Perry, and we will have time afterwards for questions for Perry. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Mathis from the Bazelon Center. The center is for people with mental health issues and mental health law, and the center is a national nonprofit legal advocacy organization that represents individuals with mental disabilities. Jennifer uses litigation, policy, advocacy, technical assistance, and training to promote the rights of individuals with mental disabilities in all areas of life, including health, care services, employment, voting, public benefits, parental rights, education opportunities, housing, community living. Jennifer has also worked for the Commissioner at the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission between 2010 and 2011, during which time she worked on the regulations that implemented the ADA amendments of 2008. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you very much. I am going to build a little bit on what Perry Jude talked about in terms of barriers that people face in being able to vote. And I just wanted to say first that we have on the Bazelon Center's website a page on voting. Bazelon Center's website is www.bazelon.org, which is BAZELON.org. And it has a couple of things that I think may be useful to folks. One is a voter guide for people with mental disabilities that sort of goes through what your rights are and what some of the problems that people face are and what they can do. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today are in that book, but I just wanted to make you aware of it. And it's actually in a couple different forms on the website, so people can print it out and can actually print it in a form that makes it into like a little booklet that you can carry with you. We also have a couple of one-page sheets that we did with the National Disability Rights Network, and one is called People with Mental Disabilities Have the Right to Vote. It's just sort of a Know Your Rights sheet, and it's something that sometimes is handy for folks to take with them when they go to vote. And then the other one is called Providing Help to Voters with Disabilities, What You Should Know, and that one is about sort of what kinds of help you can provide to somebody with a disability in casting a vote, because that's always an issue that people don't understand very well, and a lot of times people think that you can't do all these things that, in fact, you can do to help somebody vote. So those things are on our website, and actually those two one-pagers that I just mentioned I think they are now at the end of my slides, at the end of the materials. We'll see when we get there.
Yes, they are.
Okay, excellent. So let me start with a few things. What I'm going to talk about really are specific barriers, a few specific barriers that particularly stop people with mental disabilities from voting. This is folks with intellectual disabilities, folks with mental illnesses, folks with brain injury, and other mental disabilities. These are primarily things that affect them. I'm just going to talk about some key things to know about what happens and what people may be able to do about it. The first slide is called Turned Away at the Polls. This is something that happens with some frequency, which is that people show up to vote and they are told you can't vote. People may be registered and they expect to be able to vote, and a couple of things may be going on. A lot of times what it is just that the poll workers don't know what people's rights are. They get some training, but not a lot, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. And sometimes what happens is a poll worker sees someone getting help filling out a ballot and thinks, oh, that means you're not capable of voting yourself. Somebody else is really voting for you, and you can't do that. And so they say you can't vote. So that's one thing that happens. Sometimes it's a matter of the state law says that you have to be competent to vote or something like that. A lot of states have laws like that, and that's a whole other issue. And may mention it a little bit here. We think that a lot of those laws are illegal, but they're hard to challenge. We have challenged a couple of them, but there's other things that you can do besides challenging them. But in any event, so they have these sort of competence requirements that say you kind of have to know what you're doing in order to be allowed to vote. Now what that means exactly, nobody knows, because we don't really expect people to justify their votes, anybody else who votes, people without disabilities. Nobody has to kind of go through a test or something like that to be able to explain why they're voting the way they are. But they have these requirements in some states, and so sometimes, a poll worker knows that there's this competence requirement, and sees somebody, interacts with someone at the polls, and thinks this person doesn't know what he or she is doing, or if they're getting help, and I think they're not competent to vote. And so sometimes the poll worker says you can't vote based on that. Then beyond that, other things happen, like, for example, it has nothing to do with the poll worker, but what happens is some states, as I said, they have these different laws. Some states have laws saying if you have a guardian, you can't vote. And that used to be more common than it is, but a lot of states still have that law. And so sometimes what happens is you're registered to vote, and then you get placed under guardianship at some point, and then what happens is now that so much is electronic, there are all these databases, and different parts of the state and local government can connect with each other. So where it used to be that if you were under guardianship, the elections people would never have any way of knowing that. So you could still vote because nobody would know that you'd been placed under guardianship. But now they have all these connected databases, and so now when people get placed under guardianship, in some places automatically the courts that put them under guardianship, they send those records to the elections people. The elections people just start booting people off of the voter rolls. So, and sometimes they can do that under the law. Sometimes they're screwing up a lot of things, and there's a lot of confusion. Somebody may be under only limited guardianship, and they shouldn't be losing the right to vote, but it doesn't get written down that way. It just gets written down as the person's under guardianship, and so lots of people lose their right to vote when even the state law says they shouldn't. But so all these kinds of things are things that can happen to people when they show up at the polls and find out that they can't vote. So, what can folks do about that? One thing that I do urge folks to do is to take something with them to the polls. Take along our one-pagers if you can that sort of lay out people's rights. Take along a telephone number. I listed, actually, if we can go back, we're still on the first slide. I listed a couple different places to call. The first one is, it says 1-866-HOUR-VOTE, and what that is that's the election protection hotline. That works all over the country, and they have like a national center, and all these folks are figuring out how to help people on Election Day when they have problems voting, and actually before Election Day too. But they have a center, and they have people divided up by people who are dealing with disability issues and people who are dealing with other issues. And so if there's a disability-related issue, they will usually contact the NDRN, the National Disability Rights Network, and they'll be able to work with them, and NDRN will contact us. And so there will be people who know disability law and who should be able to help if there's anything that can be done. And I have done that a lot on Election Day, gotten a bunch of calls from different places in the country, and sometimes you can actually solve somebody's problem immediately and make sure that they can vote. Sometimes you can't, and even if you can't, it is helpful for people to know about the different resources that are there so that maybe they can fix the problem in the future so that by the next election they can vote. In addition to the election protection, I listed protection and advocacy systems. This is like Perry Jude's organization is the Protection and Advocacy System, or the PNA, for Arizona. Every state has a PNA, and you may want to just call those folks directly. Sometimes it takes a while to hear back, but on Election Day, a lot of times people have a way of getting to you pretty quickly to try to see if they can solve your problem. Another one I listed were the independent living centers, which are all over the country. They have gotten involved to some extent in helping people with voting problems. Additionally, there's other ones that I didn't list because I couldn't list a whole page of them, but you can call your local ARC, you can call your local mental health association or NAMI, and other places. But I listed these because at least the first one, election protection, is guaranteed somebody will answer the phone right away and will try to direct you to someone that can help you that day if they can. So that is that's the first slide. If we can go to the second slide now. Can we go to the second slide? Great. You have the right to help from the person of your choice. This is one of the key things to remember when you're at the polling place. This is, again, something that not everybody understands how it works, but the Voting Rights Act gives you the right to get help in voting and in registering, and you can get help from pretty much anybody you want except your employer. So you can show up at the poll with a friend or a family member or a service provider. You can ask the poll worker to help you. You don't have to ask the poll worker to help you if you prefer somebody else, but you have the right to get help, and no one can tell you that, if it's your friend or your family member, that they can't help you. You can get help with sort of having somebody fill out the ballot for you. You have to be the one making the choices, so it can't be that someone else is basically deciding for you what or who to vote for. But as long as the person with the disability is making the choices, they can say, if they actually can't fill out the ballot themselves, they can get help. Someone can fill out the ballot for them. You can also help someone by explaining, sometimes in simpler language, what to do. The ballot instructions sometimes are kind of complicated. I have trouble understanding them sometimes, and so that's a form of help that you can give. The helper can talk about the question with the person with the disability. They just can't tell them how to vote. Somehow it makes people nervous when they see people getting help and discussing questions and getting them explained by someone. And it's ironic because everybody turns to other folks to help them make up their minds about stuff. We all do that when we vote. We've all had lots of discussions with people, and ultimately we make our own decision. But somehow when it's a person with a disability, people think, oh my God, somebody else is voting for them. Oh my God, they can't vote themselves. And of course, it's not any different than anybody else. They have the right to get help. They have the right to discuss. They have the right to have someone explain to them what the question means. The one thing, again, that you can't do is you can't just sort of fill in the ballot, for somebody that you want that the person with a disability didn't choose. So, sometimes that happens. Actually, you hear stories of somebody whose mom had dementia, and she says, oh, my mom can't communicate anymore who she wants to vote for, but she always voted Republican, and so I know that she would want me to vote Republican for her. That you can't do because she actually has to be making the choice now. But that's about the only thing, the only kind of help you can't provide is basically making the choice for somebody else. Okay, next slide. The next slide says, don't leave without filling out a provisional ballot. This is probably the most important lesson to learn about voting barriers at the polling place. Congress passed the Help America Vote Act. Perry Jude talked about it in 2002. And one of the things that they did was they created this thing called a provisional ballot. And that just means, if you're going to get kicked out of the polling place and not be allowed to vote, that everybody has the right to at least fill out a provisional ballot. And that means that ballot goes in a separate box, and they'll deal with it later on. They'll sort out whether they think you can vote or not. But it allows you to cast what your vote would be and then to have the fight later. So if somebody says, oh, I didn't think he was competent to vote, instead of just getting kicked out of the polling place and leaving, you get to fill out a provisional ballot, submit it, and then later you can sort it out, and then you can prove that, in fact, you were competent to vote, or the state law doesn't require you to have this voter competency, and they were just sort of going out on their own. So it gives you an opportunity to at least have the fight later on. It sort of preserves your rights for the moment instead of having you just get kicked out. So that's a very important thing. I always tell people, don't leave without filling out a provisional ballot. Okay, next slide. The other big place where people get stopped from voting is, aside from the polling place, is service providers, places where people live, institutional settings, hospitals, group homes, boarding care homes, nursing homes, and all kinds of practices happen here. I listed the same numbers basically to say, or actually I didn't list the numbers for the PNAs and the independent living centers, but I listed the election protection, and for PNAs, again, you can go to ndrn.org, and the independent living centers, actually it's ncil.org, and many of the folks are already connected with their PNAs and their independent living centers. But what happens in these places is that all the time, people get asked by nursing home staff, group home staff, etc., all kinds of questions to figure out if they ought to be voting. And it's completely improper. Nursing home staff and group home staff are not the people who are supposed to be deciding who is competent to vote. If the state even has a requirement that you show you're competent to vote. And some states don't have any requirement about competence to vote, and this still happens anyway. It really has nothing to do with the law. It's just this practice because people have no idea that it's illegal. And it's really interesting how often it happens. It happens a lot in nursing homes, particularly because everybody has this concern about voter fraud happening in nursing homes and people going into nursing homes to basically try to troll for votes. And, you know, the press always spins it as, you know, oh, they're getting all these vulnerable people who don't know what they're doing, and they're going into the nursing homes and just getting them to sign up and getting them to vote, and they don't actually, it's voter fraud because they don't know what they're doing. Of course, people in nursing homes can make decisions as well as anybody else, and people in group homes and people in boarding care homes, and you have the right to make your own decision. The nursing home staff has no right to be making a decision for you about whether you're competent to vote, and has no business preventing you from voting just because they think that you're not competent to vote. There have been a couple of studies that were done. There was one done in Pennsylvania and one done in Maryland, and I just thought it was really interesting. Even in Pennsylvania, where there is no voter competence requirement, pretty much every nursing home said, oh, yeah, you know, we ask all these questions, and, you know, we'll ask people if we have any concerns about whether we think they should be voting. We'll ask, you know, who the president is and who the governor is, and, you know, all kinds of questions that in many cases folks without a disability couldn't answer either. And they're not questions that we ask of other voters. So that is not appropriate. That should not be happening. There are plenty of news stories you'll see every year where they'll talk about people voting from group homes and voter registration drives and group homes and nursing homes, and everybody's outraged because they think, oh, they're voting inappropriately. And so keep an eye out for that. We are always very interested in those situations because those people should not be prevented from voting. And the other issue that happens with the nursing homes and group homes, et cetera, is in addition to sort of sometimes getting stopped from voting, people don't get help, affirmative help. They should provide help, particularly if people need help either getting to a polling place or if they can't do that, to fill out an absentee ballot. A lot of states have same-day absentee balloting, so sometimes I get calls on election day and somebody wants to vote and they're in a hospital, and the hospital says, oh, you know, they can't leave and they're on, you know, level 1, whatever, they don't have privileges, they can't go vote. And I say, fine, then if you won't help them do that, you need to help them get an absentee ballot, at least if it's a place where they can do that same day. And sometimes people have actually asked for the absentee ballot beforehand, and that's the best situation. But even if you haven't, a lot of times you can get it that day. And then it becomes so much of a hassle for the nursing home and the hospital to try to drive around getting these people absentee ballots and then sending them in, that then they suddenly say, oh, never mind, we'll take them to the polls. Actually, we decided it's okay, they can go. So people should be able to get help. The, you know, nursing homes and boarding care homes and group homes are supposed to help you with, you know, all kinds of these basic activities of daily living, and, you know, just when it comes to something as essential as voting, we think they ought to be able to help you with that as well. So next slide. I guess the two of the main things to remember are register early, and then on the next slide, vote early if you can. Some states now have early voting, and the advantages of making sure you register as early as possible and seeing if you can do early voting is that if you have a problem, it gives you a chance to fix it. You know, if you have a problem that day, there's still time. So those are two important things to remember. Next slide. And the last thing is you may be able to help make the voting laws better in your state. This is more of a long-term goal. This is not sort of the immediate solution to what to do when you get kicked out of the polling place on Election Day. But this is a very important thing to think about. And we have actually been involved in a number of efforts in different states to try to make the laws better. It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard in a lot of states. In a lot of states, it's going to be impossible depending on what the legislature is like. But it has worked in a few states. It has been very effective. I know that Perry Jude has been involved in some efforts in Arizona, and I think it's been really hard there. But we actually did this in Maryland. We did it in New Jersey. We were working with some folks in New Mexico, and I don't think that it ended up passing. But in Maryland, the law is much better now. It used to be that if you were under guardianship, you can't vote. And we tried to get it just nothing. We tried to get any reference to voter competence just taken out, which about 10 states have. And we almost got there. We couldn't quite get there. But what we did get was a really good standard that we had come up with, which basically said if you can make a choice, if you can communicate a choice, whether to vote, whether to register, that's all you need. And then you're competent to vote. So that's what we got in Maryland. In New Jersey, we got something that was not quite as good as what we wanted. It was if you understand the right to, if you understand the voting process, you can vote. And before, what New Jersey had said was idiots and insane people can't vote. And that was, of course, ridiculous, and a number of states still say that. The only redeeming thing about the states that have that offensive language in them still is that it's so confusing and so difficult to understand that states tend not to enforce it very much. But they were actually trying to enforce it in New Jersey, so it was worth getting it changed. So anyway, this is something to think about. You know, folks can contact their protection advocacy system. They can also contact the Bazelon Center. I put our website down here because we're very interested in those state efforts to try to change the state laws. Okay, now at the very end here, I think Teresa put my 2 one-pagers. Are they at the end? Looks like they may not be.
I'm sorry, they did not copy over well.
Okay, that's fine. Well, they're on our website, and I'm happy to send them out to folks. I have Teresa send them out to folks. She has copies, so I think they're good documents to have. So I'm not sure if Sherry has made it on or not.
No, she has not. I would like to highlight a couple of things that she did. I'm going to move back up to her presentation. We did have a moment to talk, and we will have Sherry come on next time. But one of the things that she was going to talk about was the mega centers. The hope is that they will solve some problems around accessibility for the rural communities. But then again, as Perry said, there's concern that people would not be able to get to the polls because they're too far away. So it's a mixed bag of feelings about the mega centers, and that's one of the items that Sherry was going to talk about. Also, she had one of the ways that she's from Georgia, and what she was going to talk about was they have voting parties where a group of 5 people go together to the poll. Someone picks everybody up, and they go together, and everyone votes, and they have support there if they need it, and then they go out to lunch afterwards and celebrate that they all voted. And she said that there's groups of these, like 10 or 15 groups of folks that do that in Georgia together, and that's very exciting. So we'll have her present on our next call. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for our participants to start asking questions or making comments, because one of the things that we do know is that when we share information, we become more powerful. And I'm opening up the lines for those that would like to ask a question or make a comment that would be helpful to the group.
Teresa, this is Essie.
Yes, Essie.
I wanted to let you know that Cherie is online by telephone. She is muted, so she can't talk, but she cannot see the PowerPoints. But she would be available to talk if you can do that for her.
Yes, why don't we go ahead and do that? Cherie, go ahead and tell us a little more about your experiences. Cherie?
I guess she's still muted.
Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and open up the lines for phone calls. Matt and Nancy, I have you still muted. I believe that you need to release something on your end. Because I'm not getting control of your muting ability. But I'll keep trying. Does anyone have a comment or a question for our panel members? Okay. Does any one of our team members from Project Vote have a question for our panel members? I'm trying to still release your line, Nancy. I'm not sure why it's not releasing. Essie, do you have a question? Yes, go ahead, Tia.
Cherie's going to try to call in again because it wasn't unmuting, and she's going to try one more time.
Okay. Yes, for some reason I'm not able to unmute two of the lines. It means something. It should have sent you a code to put into.
I told her the PIN that I was able to unmute with. So.
Okay.
Teresa, this is Essie. I do have a question for clarification for myself. Each polling place is required to have the provisional ballot there for the people to use. And if that is so, what about places that don't have that ballot? What does someone do?
Perry or Jennifer, do you have a comment back to Essie's question?
Go ahead. Yes, the answer is every polling place is required to have provisional ballots. If they don't, I'm not sure what happens. I think different states have different procedures. I'm not sure if there's a federal procedure. Perry, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But you would have to do something like, I actually do remember news stories about this where they didn't have provisional ballots on hand, and I think they basically take the person's information and do it in an informal way, and so they're at least getting their vote cast, even if it's not on the right form.
I
Jennifer's right. I do recall that sometimes in heavy traffic areas they run out of provisional ballots.
Right.
That's a possibility. So if someone ever called the Center for Disability Law, I would urge them, if they had time, to either go to another polling location or go down to the county recorder and try to cast a ballot there if they had time, or to force the that polling location to take their information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments for our panel members? So I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. One of the things that both of you started to work on was the funding issue for protection and advocacy organizations. Do you see any other opportunities where people could work with their protection and advocacy organizations? Say you're a self-advocacy group and you would like to work on voting. Is there a way that people can help you to get that back on your priority list for some of your other activities?
Sure. Jennifer, maybe this is a little bit better for me to answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, as the executive director of the Arizona P&A, what I would advise is, right now our agency is in the middle of our priority setting process. And so in September, our board of directors will be looking at and approving our priorities for our next fiscal year, which begins October 1st. We'll put in some voting rights priorities if we're successful in our advocacy efforts to restore voting rights funding. But should that not take place, what the community should do is come to our forums or go to any P&A's public forums, fill out those surveys, public forum surveys or public surveys that every protection and advocacy agency is likely to have available at this time, and urge the P&As to continue to provide voting rights representation and services. And I think that's the best way to get the point across that voting continues to be a critical issue for our community.
Thank you, Perry. Jennifer, would you like to share some of the examples of litigation that you've helped people with again? A little more detail about how it's affected individuals personally, make it so that we can maybe see, oh yes, I get that now, I understand.
Sure.
Examples.
Sure. Well, I think the two biggest cases in which we were involved were a case in Maine that came out very well and a case in Missouri that didn't come out as well. The case in Maine was filed around 2000, 2001. It was the 2000 election, and Maine had, these were both challenges to the state's voting laws that were unfair, and they excluded people with disabilities from voting, regardless of whether they should have been voting and could be voting. Maine had a law that said if you're under guardianship by reason of mental illness, then you can't vote. And so the P&A in Maine challenged that, and we provided a lot of informal help on that case. It was one of the first cases. There was an earlier one in New York that didn't go so well, but it didn't get a lot of play. But this one, I think, really became a big deal case. It was a very good decision. What the judge said was, you can't have a law like that because it certainly screens out people from voting who are perfectly capable of voting. You have people who are under guardianship who have mental illness who understand what it means to vote and understand what they're doing when they cast a ballot, and there's no reason to prevent them from voting. And you can't simply do this one-size-fits-all. If you're under guardianship, then we're just going to say you can't vote. So that court said it was actually unconstitutional to do that, and it violated the ADA. The interesting thing about Maine is that after that case happened, the Maine legislature, I think they tried to repeal the law, and there was sort of a ballot initiative. It was put on the ballot, and people kept voting to keep that law. So I think that law is still on the books, but the Secretary of State in Maine just said we're not going to enforce it. And so they sent a letter to all of the election officials saying, this is on the books, but it's not the law, and you can't enforce this. And so now people in Maine can vote regardless of whether they're under guardianship by reason of mental illness or anything else. In Missouri, there was a similar law, just was a broader, if you're under guardianship, you can't vote. And we had a number of folks who were actually really great people to illustrate how stupid this was. We had a law professor who had gotten under guardianship late in his life, and he had some issues, but he was extremely knowledgeable about voting and the political process, and he could tell you everybody on the Supreme Court and what their philosophy was, and had very specific reasons for why he wanted to vote the way he did. And it was really just sort of absurd to think about the idea that this guy can't vote because he's under guardianship. So we had some folks like that. We had a lot of folks from People First. People First did a fantastic, fantastic job organizing folks in Missouri, and they had a lot of folks who were interested in voting and couldn't vote because they were under guardianship. And in fact, a lot of them, the irony was they couldn't vote, but they had their own People First elections for People First offices, and a lot of them had run successfully for office in addition to voting for people for office. And so it was just this really ridiculous situation. They had lobby days that People First organized, and these folks went to their state legislatures to say, here are our concerns about what you're doing with Medicaid and what you're proposing, and this affects our lives, and here's how. Very savvy and could explain all of these things, and yet they didn't have a vote. So in any event, what happened was Missouri was actually allowing people to get their right to vote back in some cases. It was just sort of, if you were lucky enough to have a guardian who would do that for you, and sometimes the guardians would say, well, we're just not going to spend the money and do that. And a lot of people were under public guardianship, and they really never saw their guardian. Guardians had 2,000 wards. And so, you couldn't, sort of as a practical matter, necessarily get your right to vote back so easily. But, some people did. If they tried, they often got it. And, these judges were just applying a standard, I think because it was such a ridiculous thing to disenfranchise everybody under guardianship, that they sort of, just made it up as they went along, and they created these standards, and people got their right to vote back if they asked for it. So basically, the court ended up saying, well, there's not really a problem here because people can get their right to vote back. And, of course, that doesn't really help if, the default rule is you just automatically lose your right to vote, and, maybe if you're lucky you can try to get it back. But they also said it was brought with the P&A as the plaintiff, and they said the P&A didn't have standing, could not bring the case. So that's how we lost that case. And I think the court also finally thought that they didn't understand the case, even though it was pretty clear. I think they sort of assumed that nobody would ever be seeking to get voting rights back for people who were under guardianship because they had mental illness. So they seemed to assume that we were only talking about people who were under guardianship because of a physical disability. And we hadn't presented any of those, and so they said, oh, well, you didn't present anybody. So that's what happened with the Missouri case. But they said some good things, like basically that you have to do this on an individualized basis, and so that was useful. But otherwise, it turned out to be an interesting, somewhat difficult case.
A learning experience, always. We do happen to have Cherie Mitchell that's on the phone with us now. Cherie is a HAVA director in Georgia's advocacy office and a former president of People First of Georgia and former vice president of the Atlanta ADAPT. Cherie, are you with us? Cherie. Cherie? Are you with us, Cherie? Well, I'm sorry, we're still having some kind of difficulty with the phone for Cherie. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the information provided by the other panelists at this time? And, well, at this time, hearing no questions, I would like to invite you to join us again on August the 25th for Myths About People Voting. We'll take some of the things that you've heard today and go a little bit deeper, and of course have lots of personal examples that perceptions, misconceptions, and some of this you really just want to say, do people really still think that way? It's so, some of it seems so absurd. And then how we're going to work together for real change and success stories from around the country. So we hope that you'll join us. That's August the 25th, and that is 1:30 to 3 Eastern Standard Time. And there will be an announcement up on the Go Voter website in the SABE web page so that you can find us again. Please look out for the opportunities to register for that next webinar. We think you'll find it very, very interesting. I'd like to thank my panelists for being on today. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for our listeners to be with us today. And we look forward to hearing from you next time. Maybe you'll have some questions that you've thought of in the meantime. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.